Well, hello, everybody. Hi, Drew. Hi, Scuzzbopper. Nice to see y'all here. Uh, Looks like we have 5 people. I guess everyone's kind of slowly rolling in. So, welcome. I just thought it'd be fun to do another thing, kind of like I did with a Star Wars video, where I respond to some comments people left. Because in both cases, in a silly way, considering these are just like science fiction movies, these were a little bit polarizing. People had different thoughts and feelings about what I had to say. And so I just thought I'd address that here. Unlike the Star Wars one, I feel like there's a little bit more room to suggest that I'm wrong, thus the thumbnail of this video. I don't know. I don't think that I'm 100% wrong, but I think there's a little bit of nuance there to be explored in these comments. So feel free in the chat to chime in with any questions, comments, or anything you have, and I'll interact with you there as I'm looking at these comments. I don't want to dive too far in right away. Fletcher says, "You criticize something I like, therefore you are my enemy." I think that really is the best approach to take with this. Yeah, just draw a hard line in the sand. And if somebody has any criticism whatsoever, they're wrong, they're the other. Probably you should unsubscribe and stir up some community drama on top of it. So one thing I should put out there just to start. I do really like the movie Minority Report. I think it's really good. It's, I think, very well paced, well acted. It has good world building, even if some of the special effects haven't aged super well since 2002. But it is a good movie. And so what I've said, and I'll get into this more when I'm talking about comments, a lot of what I said came from disappointment at what I saw as some lost potential. And so I don't know, we'll get into that more later. But yeah, I really, so in this channel, along with doing live streams, I just like popping off little thoughts that I've had over time. And this is one little thing that dug at me about Minority Report. So I don't know if it's especially well considered. It's certainly not something that I really, I don't know. It's not something that I've really developed strong thoughts about, or I don't know. It's not like a video essay I'm involved in. I really struggled there for a second. It's just this one little thought I had, and I thought I'd just pop it off in a video. And so this is probably the shortest piece of content I made in a long time, except for that one experimental short. By the way, on my main channel tomorrow, I'm going to finally have a regular video. It's about The Hobbit and how the movies kind of ruined the story of the book. So if that's the kind of thing you're into, I'll be happy to see you there. Same regular time. Was it noon my time? So it'll be like 4 Eastern. But I think there's more that I could say, but I think a lot of this will play out as we get into comments. So yes, Drew, community drama equals engagement. We know that well here in our household. Not that there's drama within our house, but we've both been involved in online things that, people just end up fighting. They turn into kindergartners when they're online, unfortunately. We've seen some of that within the atheist community recently, just within social circles too. People just get really weird and really immature. So to the comments, people had a lot of things to say, and it took a few different thrusts. I'm not reading through every comment in order like I did with the Star Wars one. I just want to go through a few of the main ideas that popped up here, kind of clustered by common ideas. So just to take it easy on myself, I'm going to start with the nice things. Freezer Burn 421. And I read these out loud for the first time. I kind of glance at the names and don't always really see them unless it's somebody familiar. But really enjoy your movie reviews. I would have watched more of this one. So nice of you to say. I kind of like doing movie reviews. Maybe I should do more, and specifically just kind of off the cuff ones like this. And it wasn't super off the cuff, but just shorter, I don't know, shoot from the hip things. And then I had a couple comments, short and sweet, short but sweet. Thanks. I kind of too want to see them around, I think, here and on Zadanza. But yeah, I guess apparently people like when things are just a little short and to the point. One of the things I was thinking one of the things that distinguishes this channel from my main one is I was thinking the main one would be a little bit longer developed video essays. And this would be a place for things were just shorter and I didn't want to develop into full length videos or just live. And people seem to like this. All right. So maybe for the amount of effort you put in versus what you get out of it, shorter videos aren't so bad to do every once in a while. And then this is another thing I got a few of, was just mentions of the fact that this is a short story by Philip K. Dick from 1956. I don't know, it feels a little weird that they just said it like this, but maybe they just wanted to inform me that it was based on a short story. It had been said many times by then, which I don't expect somebody dropping a comment to know what everybody else had said. And then I did get a few, I'm starting with all the nice stuff. I did get a few people who it was encouraging to hear, saw things the way I did and had noticed this same thing before. So I've waited ages to hear this take. Thanks. As a science fiction movie, it was a letdown, more a shallow murder mystery built on a magical premise, but I could somewhat enjoy it as a decently acted thriller. So I think I agree with both of those. It's a little bit of a letdown in terms of development of science fiction ideas. And I probably simplify when I say that, because one of the common things that people are going to say here, and I kind of agree with, is that I honed in too much on one specific idea and there were other ideas in there. I'm going to get ahead of myself if I start talking about that before I get to more comments. Drew says short stories are often more easily adapted to a screenplay than novels. And I think that can be true too, depending on novels can just get too long and have too much stuff in it and maybe be a little more in depth. Short stories probably also just give you freedom to flesh things out. Science fiction generally lends itself really well to short stories too. Just because you can really hint at some interesting ideas in a short period of time and make it a little bit quick and punchy. And I guess I should, before I get too much further into this, I should mention some of the differences between the movie and the book / story. I don't know what genre the story was, as far as I don't think it was a full-scale novel or anything like that. But it was an interesting book, and it really typified, I think, the difference between Philip K. Dick's writing and a lot of the adaptations based on it. We have Leslie here saying, I don't have the attention span for novels. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't. There's probably not a lot of reading of novels going on anymore now. There's so many more easy ways to get entertainment, or even I don't know, if you want to read commentary on something, you listen to a video essay versus read anything. But I think so. Dick's works are often, I would say, maybe a little clinical, and I feel like, and this is an informal thing. There's no informed academic take behind this or anything like that. This is just me speaking as somebody who read a lot of science fiction from that era. So I read a lot of Asimov, Heinlein, Clarke, Bova, all those people. A lot of them, especially Asimov, is probably the stereotypical exemplar of this. They're they aren't heavy into characterization. They don't build what feels like a real world populated with real people. I'm not saying they entirely don't, but they don't do that as much as they explore ideas. And it seems like they come off to me as written for teenage or young adult boys who are fascinated by ideas, and they can come off a little cold and clinical and even harsh, or almost, I don't know. There's a lack of feeling and just a really bald-faced curiosity about ideas versus care for people in them. And there's a couple things in the Minority Report story that I think definitely is reflected in that. Maybe it's just a product of its time. Fletcher says you can't really capture the experience of reading PK Dick. And I think that's true. His stuff would be very difficult to adapt into a movie I don't know. Obviously, it's been adapted in a movie several times, but it would be hard to adapt into a movie in a way that captures the tone and pacing of his stories, because they very much are more suited for writing, and they do have that detached clinical tone to them. And that sounds bad when I say that. Oh, and Ashra says, let's go. Welcome. Nice to see you in this live. I'm sure I'll see you tomorrow as well. I'm sure I'll see several of you tomorrow too. Don't mean to single Ashra out. Just don't usually see you here. But I lost my train of thought now. Oh, yeah. That sounds bad when I say that, but that's actually kind of a good thing, depending on what you're into. For stories, just developing fleshed out ideas, sometimes at the expense of characterization or world building or anything like that, can really be good. And maybe I'm not really capturing what's happening here, but I feel like his story was, well, if I'm back up a little bit, I actually first read his writing in college when I had to read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And it was in a it was in a time period where I had to read a lot of books. So I was in classes where I had to read novels and then write essays, and there was like a full-time job just doing that. It was pretty crazy. I think I piled the wrong classes together. But I was just like rushing through this book. I remember laying on the couch in my dorm reading the Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. And I was a big fan of Blade Runner, and I found that it was very good, and it was a much easier read than I expected, considering it was based on Blade Runner, because that is a little, I don't know, slow and deliberative for a science fiction movie. And Androids felt a little more dense and fast paced and more ideas based. And to me, that kind of captures the feel of the difference between his work and how it's adapted. It seems like they take things that are a lot more idea based and have a lot more moving pieces going on and turn it into something that's more moody or atmospheric. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think they do a good job of, like you said, Drew, or who said that? Fletcher said, yeah, and different from the movie, Drew just said, that you can't really capture the way he writes a story, but I think often they do a really good job of capturing those core ideas in a way that works better in a movie, I guess is maybe a way of putting it. Janky Puzzles, welcome. I don't like these high concept movies that have strict universe rules and just sort of go meh, whatever at the end. Yeah, that's kind of a letdown. If you're gonna suggest ideas, just stick with those, or like play them out in some kind of satisfying way. I hate that when movies have really cool world building and it suggests you're going to get something really thoughtful, and then they just use it as a premise for like action set pieces. That's always driven me crazy. One example of that, and this might sound funny, but this is from my childhood, so give me a little bit of leeway here, was Robotech, I think is the name of it. I guess I'm spacing on the name now. It was that cartoon where they would fly in jets that could turn into robots or something like that. And the beginning where they found this alien thing crashed on Earth and we're digging it up and everything like that. It felt like actually a science fiction exploration of like encountering with aliens, and that just turned into like fighter pilot action. And that's not bad, but to me, it just felt like a letdown. And I think a lot of science fiction movies and shows do something similar. I don't know if Janky, if that's what you're getting at, but I think I appreciate some version of what you're saying there. But yeah, the Minority Report book was a lot different, and I feel like I got a lot of comments saying it was better, and we'll see a few of those flow through here. I could see what they're saying, and I agree on some level. It's just a different animal. But I do think its approach to the ideas were different. So my core criticism of the book, of the movie, I guess I haven't really explicitly stated that here, is that it has this central idea, which is the idea of pre-crime, being able to predict crime ahead of time and then stop somebody from, in this case, it's just murder in the movie, not in the book. They can stop a murder before it happens. And so that keeps everybody safe because they intercept the killer. And so it sets up this question of, is this a good idea and how would you implement it? And so what my core disappointment was that that's a really fascinating idea with a lot of really good possibilities. But instead of maybe showing what's wrong with that in and of itself, they just attach it to these other ideas, which are, the main one is, I think, haloing people. And then the other one would be the fact that they use the precogs in kind of a cruel way to predict the crime. And so it just kind of lumps them together, these two other bad ideas, and throws it all out together and says this is a nightmarish vision of the future. There were other things about the future that were pretty rough. The drug use, just the general decay of society and stuff like that. And I know there are a lot of ideas other than that about like escaping from reality and stuff that are I think pretty well explored in the movie. So that's where this gets a little complicated. Again, we'll get to that more with comments, but I just found that one little thing to be a big letdown, because being able to predict future crimes could actually be really good in a lot of ways, depending on what you did with it, depending on, I think I said in the video, depending on how much of an invasion of privacy it was, what you did with people when you caught them. So I feel like there was so much room to explore positives or at least nuance, and that just all went out the window. So that was my core issue. In the book, I felt like there were a few things that were more interesting. Number one, and I guess if you haven't read the book and this is a spoiler for you, this is a good time to bail. But I'm not getting this in any particular order. But one thing I liked in the book was that they just had a printout that said whatever, that just captured whatever the precogs had predicted. And so that set off, I thought that was a better vehicle for Anderton's paranoia and stuff, because that could have come from anywhere. He just gets this printed message versus I think in the movie he sees like actual visions that came from the precogs. Also in the movie, there isn't that issue of concern for how the precogs are treated, because in the movie, they're actual humans and you can tell they're miserable and traumatized by what's happening, or at least that seems to be the case as it goes on. The books, they're just not functional people. They have a disorder that I think came from nuclear war, a mutation from nuclear war. And so some aspect of their brain evolved to the point where they could predict the future, but then it also removed essentially any form of personality from them. And so that totally set aside the question of whether there was any cruelty in how the precogs were used, or just as a product of its time, it was a form of callousness. And they would refer, I think Anderton would refer to the precogs as idiots multiple times in the story, and maybe even the voice of the story would. So I don't know how much of that is just how they would view some people with disabilities back then, or how much it was just that they literally had no personality. But that wasn't attached to the story in the book, for better or for worse. And then in the end, one of the things that's way more interesting in the book, I think, than in the movie is what creates the Minority Report. In the movie, again, I'm probably not going to get all the details correct, but in the movie, I think it was just simply errors in how they read the future, or at least, and if I'm tripping over this, please let me know. But in the book, the Minority Reports, it was revealed, came from the fact that as Anderton acted, each new report they got from a precog would incorporate his knowledge of what had happened. So as he gets the first report from a precog that says he's going to kill somebody, then he goes and gets another. He gets another report, but that report takes into account what he had learned from the first one, and so it kind of plays with the idea of what is the future, how malleable is the future, and obviously, in any case, if a precog predicts you're going to murder somebody and then pre-crime comes in and stops you, then that's not an accurate prediction of the murder. And so the book did a lot of really interesting toying with that idea. And finally, puzzlingly, whereas in the movie, Anderton found the whole pre-crime thing to be very problematic, in the book, he ends up letting himself he lets himself commit a murder. He commits a murder on purpose just to vindicate the pre-crime system. So it's complicated because of this whole thing where the military is trying to take over the police force. But the book does kind of attach an outside thing, like an outside concern to the pre-crime thing, I guess, because Anderton, knowing that the Minority Reports undermine the idea of pre-crime, he allows himself to go through with a murder that he could have not committed in order to keep the pre-crime thing from being canceled. And that sounds like a horrifying idea, but the book connects it to him needing to basically fend off a coup by the military. And so I don't know, it's quite a different thing from the book. In most ways, I would say it's for the better. It's a little more interesting, but there isn't as much characterization and world building, I don't think, is in the movie. The movie feels like a more real place in more ways. Yeah, Drew Harrison, magical handicap person trope. That probably was part of it. Yeah, that probably was a common thing. Maybe it has to do with I don't know if fetishizing is the right word, but yeah, having this magical, condescending image of autistic people, among other things. So, anyway, now back to the comments, I guess. A salient cephalopod, been around a while. Nice person. Disposition of the criminals in Minority Report always bothered me. What's the point? Is there an end goal? The movie was based on a book. I have it in my stack to read. I suspect that this is another prime example of a book being better than the movie. It would almost have to be. And PKD is a god among authors. Yeah, if you haven't read the book, I would definitely suggest reading it, even considering that I've mostly spoiled it. It's still pretty interesting to read. They have it, I think almost all of Philip K. Dick's stuff, or a lot of his major works, are on YouTube for free to listen to. So if you're more of an audiobook person, that's an easier thing for you, then that's a good way to go. I'm re-listening to Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep right now. They have that fully narrated online. So if that's your thing, then great. Yeah, the disposition of the criminals, that was the core thing. I think that was the big, maybe I overemphasized the issues of the precogs because that was kind of tacked on. But really the big thing that seemed like it was presented as the consequence of pre-crime was the fact that they would halo them and stick them in that warehouse. And that's the thing that really bothers me from the start, is why are they doing that? What's the point? What does that add to the story? And you're essentially just throwing this horrible punishment onto pre-crime that wasn't necessary. It's not a logical extension of having a pre-crime program. And it just seems like it's kind of trying to poison the well and make the whole thing horrible. And it stops you from really considering the positives and negatives of pre-crime. That was my big issue. Now, some people have said I represented getting haloed as being kind of torturous or kind of a nightmare scenario. And some people pushed back about that in the comments. But there's a line from, I can't remember the guy's name, the guy who was in charge of warehousing them. Maybe they called him a warden or something. He said that they were, at one point, he told Anderton, all your dreams are about to come true. And I think people might misread that as being like your dreams come true in the colloquial sense of, everything you're about to get everything you want or whatever. What it seems a lot more like, yeah, Tim Blake Nelson played that part. Thank you. What it seems more like what he was saying is just that your mind is going to run wild and out of control. Because at first he said, the first time Anderton visited the place, he said that they look peaceful, but they're busy, busy, busy inside. And then it's, I think he said that your life is just constantly flashing before your eyes. So when he says your dreams are coming true, what I think he means is that you're just living in a constant state of, you're dreaming, a dream state becomes your reality. So things are just constantly randomly flashing through your head. I don't know that counts as some kind of torture, but to me, that's a horrifying idea. And it seems like it was coded as being horrifying in the movie. Nobody wanted to be haloed. You're just stuck in this place where you're in some kind of suspended animation and constantly dreaming. So I think you would lose your sense of self. It's almost like being stuck on a trip for a long time. And if you don't know that it's going to be a good or a bad trip and it's going on for years, I find that horrifying. And so to me anyway, maybe I'm wrong, but it didn't seem like they were just being put into a euphoric state just to warehouse them and keep them happy. It seemed like they were being put into something that was just absolutely horrifying. And in any case, I don't know why the more logical step, if you could intercept people before committing a crime, wouldn't be, as I said in the video, to do some kind of counseling with them. Obviously, they don't. I think they had pretty much eliminated premeditated murder. So everything else was a crime of passion. So basically, somebody's been pushed to the point of emotional stress that they just lash out, knowing that, you know, even with the intellectual knowledge that this pre-crime thing exists and they're probably going to get intercepted. Uh, the fact that somebody can be pushed to that, I think, makes, especially if they hadn't actually done anything, they hadn't carried through the action, I think some kind of just counseling or intervention like that would make a lot more sense. Why do you just tack on any form of punishment at all, or any kind of like warehousing of people? What's the point of that? Unless it's just society just wants them, they have a singular goal of making sure everybody else is safe with no regard for the pre-criminal. But again, that turns it into a whole other idea. I mean, and if not like counseling or whatever, some kind of monitoring or something like that. The Nerk Twin says, I think your perspective is 100% correct. I've seen this movie many times and wanted to love it, but just leave unfulfilled. And I don't want to read through all of these, but again, just more people agreeing with me on this, which I found a little validating. Then we get into a little bit. This is a comparison of the book and the movie. The short story says much more than the film does. Once again, Hollywood changed the source material for reasons that are not apparent. Mostly it seems to be that they think they can do a better job than the typically world famous author. And I can see the frustration with that. It is really hard, especially if you're a fan of a book and the writer is really good, to see people Hollywoodize it. The only caveat I would add to that is that sometimes that actually does make sense. And as in the case of, I think it's suggested earlier in this chat, it's just very difficult to fully adapt certain styles of writing to a movie. My dad and I had always said the same thing about Foundation. We were Foundation fans when I was a kid. We'd both read the books and we talk about them and stuff. And we just didn't think it would make that exciting a movie, just because it was a lot of backstory and a lot of talking and stuff like that. Dune probably has a similar challenge, just because it's such a rich story with lots of lore, and I don't know, they've done some pretty good job with a couple movies, but I think it's most Dune fans come up unhappy. But anyway, I trailed off, but I totally understand this, and I do sympathize. I feel this way about this story in a lot of ways, but you have to alter some things, I think, and where you draw that line can be a little tricky. Cantoro says, I love how you're making a video on a 20-plus-year-old movie, LOL. I started out thinking this was just sarcastic. I want people to do more. I also thought a bit about this, and you're right. The movie doesn't do a lot with the core premise. If you make a story involving pre-crime, the characters used explicitly at this point. So I think he's starting to suggest to have the characters experiment with it and see what it can do, which I think the book did some. The movie did. I think they did some stuff with this as well. But again, I can see how a lot of people, and I do too, feel like it touched on some interesting ideas and just didn't really explore them that deeply. I'm not even going to try to pronounce this name. That always bothered me in the movie. Why would the ability to predict a crime make you create a punishment far greater than punishments that currently exist in our world? And that's a big part of the issue with me too. But hey, being Tom Cruise, a Scientologist, I wouldn't expect much of a moral compass from him. Ashra, I want people to review older movies too, see how your perspective has changed on the lesson in movies. Yeah, maybe I should do this more. Maybe the extracurricular channel is just a good place to just give off the cuff thoughts on old things I've watched. Because I think there is a lot of shared common memory of these things that we've seen in childhood or whatever. I'm especially interested in things that I feel like I had a unique viewing experience of, that maybe weren't really big name movies. Like I just saw something about The Black Hole, that Disney movie that was very, very uneven, but I found a lot interesting about it. And a lot of what I like is tied to my childhood experience. So I don't know, maybe I'll get into stuff like that. I'm also struggling with how much of this stuff belongs on this channel versus maybe just putting it on there if I develop that, even if it's shorter, because one thing I might be doing that drags that channel down, the views have declined drastically on that channel and very steadily, is I'm not releasing stuff very often. So I thought maybe putting higher quality stuff that's longer over there and keeping that consistent would be good. But yeah, Drew, the Dune series needs to be a 900 episode anime. I didn't see anime when I clicked on the button at first, but that is an interesting thought. But yeah, I've actually never finished reading Dune, which as a science fiction fan in my youth is probably a huge oversight. I started it and wherever I was at in life in college, I think it was at that time where I was being assigned all these other books in my classes. Yeah, I thought it was really good. I probably got about halfway through and I never finished it. But based on what I remember reading about it, and then also from everything everybody has said, that's basically the sentiment is it just needs to be way longer. Agree 100%. I didn't realize I had these many agreed comments in here. I kind of piled these in and a little bit rushed. Some of the cherished sci-fi classics are terribly overrated. For example, some of the music in Blade Runner is so jarringly misplaced that it's painful to watch. Blade Runner, I think, was a great movie, but it's actually been a long time since I watched it. So I don't know if it was part of my viewing experience was based on my youthful desire to see the best in it. And I had this phase when I was younger where I wanted to enjoy good science fiction movies. So of course I like 2001: A Space Odyssey. That's the typical thing. Blade Runner. Fletcher says I've never finished reading Dune either, and I've started it like 5 times. It is pretty thick. That probably would be a good audiobook option. My 2 younger sons, they listened to it in audiobook form while they were driving from my house back and forth. Fletcher also said, I love the Blade Runner soundtrack. Yeah, that seemed like a weird take to me. I thought it was pretty good too, but it is kind of electronic and a little, I don't know how I would describe it. It's not an upbeat soundtrack, or maybe would be a way of putting it. It's very moody and atmospheric. To me, it fit, but maybe it's not for everybody. Drew said, I've only read the last 3 twice, but I'm pretty sure I've read the first 3 like 10 times. Wow, that's a lot of Dune reading, if that's what you're referring to. My brother was huge into Dune as well. I think my second son is a pretty big fan as well. Out of the Deep says, I think this is Fletcher, actually liked the movie until the final showdown between Tom Cruise and his boss. No doubt the precogs have seen this. But the whole point is that once you've seen your future, you can make decisions to change it. But Max von Sydow actually didn't see the future. He just assumes that what the precogs saw and then makes a choice based on what he assumes they might have seen. Makes the sci-fi premise we've been exploring for the past 2 hours totally irrelevant. That's a lot to get my head around, but I think there is a lot of truth there. And that's part of the problem here is anything involving seeing the future or responding to the future is just it's going to eventually come unraveled if you get too deep into it. Maybe one thing the movie flubbed on is it tried showing this from too many different perspectives. I think one thing I noticed with Philip K. Dick writing is it tends to very, very often go to somebody who has limited knowledge of reality. So a couple of his most well-known works have somebody missing knowledge of his past or having some kind of insomnia, I think. And then I think that's in Total Recall. And then also, what is it? Paycheck. Both of those involve somebody having a lot of his memories erased voluntarily, but it creates a lot of confusion. And then Minority Report's similar too, except instead of knowledge of the past, is this like instead of removing knowledge of the past, it gives you patchwork knowledge of the future. And I think there's a similar level of disorientation there. But keeping it based on his perspective versus throwing a lot more, I don't know, showing it from through the eyes of a lot more people, and maybe I'm losing my train of thought. But I think keeping it removing it from one person's head just creates a lot more tangled stuff that can come unraveled. I'm thinking on the fly here. I'm not sure how totally true that all is. And then I got a couple comments that were I maybe could read as critical. It's mostly an action movie, so basically you're spending too much time thinking about this. You're pitching a 140 IQ movie for a 95 IQ audience. That that doesn't make any money. There's probably truth there. I think that's a little potentially condescending though, because I think there are more people who would appreciate good ideas than people think. But there definitely is also more of an easy draw for just basic entertainment. Drew says that I'm surprised people still know the Mission Impossible movies. Yeah, I could see that. Yes, the old unclench your sphincter. Donna Mifflin says, "Are you expecting too much from this movie?" That is legitimately a good question, I guess. And I think that comes down to the core of how I'm approaching this and how people perceive it. I think personally, I have a reasonable criticism of it, and other people share that. Other people have said, "Thank you. I've been seeing this the whole time, and it bothers me too." But that doesn't necessarily mean you throw out the whole movie or that you're coming to any final conclusion about its quality. And I think usually in movie criticism, trying to reach that conclusion misses the point. And I think that's where a lot of these arguments come from among perfectly intelligent people who have intelligent readings of the same text and maybe even some of the same texts. You're trying to come to an actual conclusion and give a grade to something, find a place to sit it on a shelf and judge it as good or bad. When really, to me, this is just a personal observation and something I found to be a letdown. That doesn't mean the movie isn't super good. That doesn't even mean that I necessarily have super high expectations of it. I kind of said things that indicated that, I think, in my video, but I don't think that, number one, I don't think my expectations are super high. It didn't necessarily need to be a brilliant exploration of those ideas. I just think going somewhere down that path would have been better. The better, obviously. But really, this is just me saying I think it was a really good movie in a lot of ways, but this is just something that I found to be a letdown personally. If other people don't find that to be a letdown, that's great. If other people find that wasn't even a necessary avenue for the movie to explore, that makes sense too. There are a lot of other things that movie explores, along with just being a very well-paced and well-acted movie with a lot of good tension in it. All that stuff is valid. So this is just me with one specific thing that I found to be a letdown that might connect with some people and might not connect with others. And so I'm really not trying to dump on this movie. I find it to be an enjoyable watch and a pretty good picture of a future. Kind of chilling, really, especially like the advertisements and stuff like that and people's escape from reality. It ended up in a creepy way being very prophetic. Scuzzbopper said, I think they spent a lot of time designing the future world without putting the same level of effort into the story. That could have been. Fletcher, if Jurassic Park can explore deep ideas and be a big blockbuster, so can Minority Report. Yeah, I think that's true. Or, I mean, just think of, for a really extreme example, think of Severance. That wasn't a blockbuster in the conventional sense of getting a theatrical release and maybe trying to draw quite the same audience. But that was a super interesting story, I thought. It defied most people's expectations of what a blockbuster or anything to draw a wide audience would look like. And it became a pretty big cultural phenomenon. So I think you can give your audience credit and make something really good and people will appreciate it. Micaiah Snow the First, sorry for mispronouncing your name. Hello, I'd be interested in your take on Lawnmower Man. Maybe I'll have to give that a shot. I honestly never watched that. My only memories of it is this was back, I think it came out when I was a Christian and I was quite a bit younger. And so all I remember of it that it was VR related, also that it was rated R and it had some kind of virtual sex scene. And so it was just one of those no hands off movies. But yeah, I should maybe catch up. I have a feeling from what I've heard that it's kind of mediocre, but I don't know. It would be worth giving a shot, though. There's a lot of iconic but flawed science fiction that I find really interesting to watch. Uh, Here's an interesting comment. It's a science fiction, sci-fi Hollywood movie, not some documentary about the future. Can you do Snow White next? This is more or less the same comment as the others, but the end, I'm like, this sounds like a manosphere adjacent, like critical drinker viewer. That's the kind of take this sounds like. It also feels a little bit like back on my previous channel. Well, that's cool talking about Christians. Now you're going to talk about Muslims, but whatever. And if I'm misreading your comment and you're saying this, sorry. I don't know if this is like somebody who habitually watches or if it's just a drive-by comment from a random person. I'm not necessarily judging you. That's just how it read to me. Tony from Syracuse says, I love Minority Report so much. I love everything about it. I love the fact that it's one of the science fiction movies I feel like I could walk into and hit the ground running. It's bright and beautiful, and the tech is amazing. Sure, it brings up issues such as intrusiveness and technology gone wrong, but that cat's out of the bag anyway. And then I guess some wishes that Spielberg would make more blockbuster stuff. Yeah, and I can appreciate this take as well. I personally like it too. Again, I wouldn't find this enough of a letdown to comment on if I didn't generally like the movie. Plow King and welcome. If I haven't said hi to you yet, it's because he cleared all his thetans. Oh yeah, that's a Scientology thing, isn't it? Drew, also don't review Disney movies. No matter fair use will get copyright strikes. Well, I don't. That's why I don't show footage of anything. I just show still images, which probably makes them a little boring because there's no clips or anything like that, or not even any moving footage. But I got so burned with showing any kind of footage and how easily that gets you not necessarily struck, but like a claim on your videos. So I just started using still pictures of stuff. And then we started getting into what essentially I would call you missed some points comments, and I think these are fair. This one's more of an implicit one. Don't come out and say it, but there were several comments that said you missed something. If you're a YouTuber or content creator of any kind, you missed something comments will raise your hackles a little bit. And okay, I'm not saying it's annoying and that people shouldn't say it, but just to let you know, your first instinct is get a little defensive, and you have to check yourself because it's not always warranted to be defensive. But part of the challenge of making YouTube content is you only have so much time to say so much if you want your video to be of any reasonable length and also well paced, and you just don't have time to consider everything. And so when people say you missed stuff, I don't really get irritated, but again, it's just an initial reaction. I didn't necessarily miss it. I just didn't choose to talk about that, or that wasn't part of what I was addressing, or maybe I left it on the cutting room floor for the sake of time. A little too much of a rant there, I guess. But Cheetah X says, I think they tried to explore multiple ideas. This person even say that. So what am I talking about? The first is the obvious. Is it really a crime if prevented in time? And the second is at what cost? Because they put the precogs through a lot of hurt. In a way, the movie source code explores similar ideas. I think Minority Report tries to do too much, making it a bit shallow. So this is a mixed. They have different ideas, but they ultimately didn't like certain things about it. But yeah, I think this is where they do explore different ideas and not just the pre-crime thing, and also tagging on the precogs. I guess even if it is tacked onto the idea of it, it could be, I guess it could be seen as you add some kind of even contrived consequence to it to, it's kind of that thought experiment about the society that's perfect, but there's one kid trapped in a room being tormented. And that is it from a pure utilitarian standpoint, is that worth it? How do we know the writers were trying to tell us what seemed like a good idea is actually a bad idea versus the overall idea being good? But here's one example of where it went wrong. And this is another valid criticism. Do we need to did this movie need to address that specific thing? No, it didn't. I mean, it is perfectly valid just to use just show one future where pre-crime could be a good idea, but they handled it wrong, and here's the consequences. Or this all could just be a setup just for an action thriller or a mystery movie. What was a film noir detective movie is kind of how a lot of people characterize it. So really, the film was under no obligation, uh, even in terms of quality, to address that specific issue. It could have just used that as a jumping off point for an action movie, and the pre-crime thing and everything could be purely psychological. Like, it is pretty gripping, just the idea that Anderton worked in pre-crime and all of a sudden found himself on the little ball that rolled out. So that is valid. That's where this is just my personal sense of letdown, because I think it would have been more interesting if they handled it differently, but that's just purely a matter of preference. Maybe it explores the horrific nature of utilitarianism. So this, I think, what I was touching on previously, where the agency and even the humanity of a few may be denied to benefit the many. So yeah, that's exactly what I was saying before. I think that's a perfectly valid point. This is just personal. I don't find that as interesting as delving into just the inherent nature of being able to predict crime and what that would do to us as a society and as people. But all right, now we're getting into there are things you missed. And if you're watching this DSTRCDT or whatever, this is no jab at you. This is a perfectly valid thing to say. I'm just describing the initial reaction, and maybe I shouldn't even say that. But a few things I missed. One is the story about how the system never works. And that's the dilemma they're presented at the end. Second, John isn't innocent in the movie, so he actually would have wanted to commit the crime. And that's something that's actually dealt with in the book too. There was a natural reason for him to potentially wanted to kill the person who was replacing him. And that actually is a really good a really good point too. It doesn't, I think him actually being potentially guilty makes the story more interesting, because I think what he's referring to is the fact that he wanted to kill the person who had taken his son, even though they had framed somebody. But the fact that he could be driven to that. What do you do with the fact that people can be driven to something, and if they don't, I don't know. It's the whole. At what point are you guilty if you don't commit a crime, but you were ready to do it or whatever? And Anderton is somebody who I think you could get to that point and we can sympathize with. I think that is an interesting idea. And thirdly, the prison isn't hell. According to the movie, all your dreams come true. This makes sense. And so, yeah, I think I did already address this earlier. I don't think that means what we think of usually when you say all your dreams come true. I think it's more being lost in a perpetual dream state, which I think would be pretty horrifying. That's maybe a matter of interpretation. But if you actually watch the movie and what that character was saying at that point and how he said it to Anderton, and also what he'd said about people previously, I really don't think that he means you're being put into a happy euphoric state. What he said at first, he said it's kind of a rush. And so it's described as kind of a mixed bag, but I don't know. If you go back and watch that, if you heard somebody saying that and they were about to put something on your head, I do not think you would be going into that situation peacefully. I think you would be horrified. That's just me. And this leaves an ambiguity about whether it could actually work. So yeah, I mean, there were interesting thoughts here. I don't mean to hit too hard on the you missed some things thing. That's valid. But yeah, there are a lot of different angles to tackle this movie from, and I picked one. So that's not even playing down or criticizing people for pointing that out. It's not saying that's not a good thing to say. As I'm reading these comments and thinking about it, it does make me question, was this a good approach to criticizing this movie, or was it fair? Fletcher says we should have seen what Anderton went through when he was haloed. Yeah, one thing people say, I think it's a really common theory surrounding the movie, is that everything in the movie after he gets haloed and escaped and everything is actually his dreams. Well, I don't usually like those things, but considering that was a very well set up possibility, I think it's interesting enough to think about. But I think if I might be mistaken, it seems like they showed enough stuff from other people's perspective that that wouldn't really be viable. Or maybe he's dreaming stuff that he's not seeing himself. Who knows? I think this critique overlooks a few things. For one, I think the story implies that no matter what one did to stop the proto murderers or other criminals, it could be arguably torturous. I think the story is also meant to highlight the absurdity of zeroing in on murder, but it emphasizes murder helped give focus to stick to a near universal evil. I think I hear where you're coming from, but you could cut the story a bit more slack. And maybe I could, and maybe I could present it in a way that doesn't sound so absolute. Who knows? I think that's a very fair criticism. I do think that they might be misreading the movie a little bit, unless I'm mistaken. I don't think that the police in the movie zeroed in on murder. I think murder was the one thing that the precogs were able to predict just due to the nature of how they worked. And so it probably, if pre-crime could have stopped other crimes, maybe they would have. But there was some magical, mystical, kind of silly sounding reason why the precogs would only predict murder. It's because there was some kind of, I don't know, almost supernatural sounding rift in the human experience when somebody's life is violently taken by another person. In the book, by the way, it's not limited to murder. In fact, I think the precogs just predict everything. And so the way it worked in the book is the precogs would just sit there in chairs versus in a pool, I think. And they just sit there and babble about everything they see from the future. So they're constantly seeing visions from the future and just talking about it. And so they're sitting there just talking about random chatter. And every once in a while, they'll mention a murder. And so there's a computer constantly listening to them. And whenever it picks up a sign that they're talking about murder, it would record that specific thing and just avoid all the nonsense. I felt like that was one thing that was a downer about the movie, is that feels really contrived to have an excuse for why precogs only sense murder. But I guess in both cases, whether you're coming up with an explanation that that's all they see, or if you're using a computer to filter out all the other information, you're just using a plot device to get to the same point. I think you're missing one of the key points that comes up a lot in his work, especially as it may have been made in movies. It's not necessarily about exploring the implications of pre-crime. People do that on their own just by virtue of having watched the movie. The people who are in prison are able to fantasize a better future for themselves, or a worse one. That's one of the compelling ideas that's not really delved into. And the idea that each person makes their own prison. So when Chief Anderton is finally apprehended and put in prison, then it begs the question whether the events that followed his escape and confrontation, did any of that happen? Okay, so yeah, they're getting into that one theory about whether everything that happened after he was haloed was a dream. You could either way, but that is often the point of PKD's work. That's a really good point too. And yeah, the movie doesn't have to be about the implications of pre-crime. I've addressed this already in hindsight. And it's hard for me to tell whether I, with a sense of self-awareness, just talked about something that bugged me and how much I actually did think of that as a conclusive criticism of the movie. And I've reflected on it in hindsight since then. I'm not 100% sure. But I can definitely see how I came off too abrasively, or at least too conclusively, considering there's all these other ideas. So, I'm qualifying what I said to explain why these, I don't know, I wasn't meaning to be dismissive of the movie, but also I know that I explained it in a way that probably was begging to generate comments like these. And I think people were in the right to point this out. Yeah. And that's the last comment, I guess. So those were the comments to my video about, sorry, I'm spacing out a lot. It's getting a little late for me considering I've been sitting here talking the whole time. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Minority Report. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, not nearly as many people are going to watch these as actual regular videos, but I think it's just a fun way to create a little bit of dialogue about what I've some of my commentary and how people react to it. Josiah says, limiting what they see to murder stops you from thinking about all the more useful and interesting applications of seeing the future than law enforcement. Yeah, and that's something that the story mentioned too, is that I think the first people, and you can imagine, who wanted to get a hold of the precogs were investors and stuff, or people want to use it for commercial reasons. And I think Anderton had a fight to keep it restricted to just being used to predict crimes. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this. It's just kind of fun to sit here and hang around and BS about what I said and what other people think about it. If you like this kind of stuff, let me know in the comments if you like to see more of these, or if there's something you'd like to see that's different. Also, definitely, if you like me talking briefly about old movies or whatever, leave a comment about that as well, and suggest things too. If there's an old, especially science fiction movie or anything that you would like me to just share my 5 to 10 minute thoughts on, just go ahead and pop that in the comments. And Jay, we got a new person showing up. I love that movie. Yeah, again, I like a lot about it too. I think it's an enjoyable movie, and I can totally understand why people like it. I'm not here to dump on it, even though I probably kind of did in the initial video. Loved all the futuristic movies in the early 2000s. Yeah, it was a good and kind of unique time for science fiction, I think. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Unless anybody else has anything else to pop in there, I'm probably going to cut off now. My throat's getting a little sore, and I don't know if you can hear it, but I'm feeling a little congested. So I'm probably going to say goodnight. But thank you all for joining me, and hopefully I'll see a lot of you tomorrow. I'm doing my first, not my first. I'm doing my video about the Hobbit and how the movies treated the books material and stuff like that. So I'll see you there, and I guess I'll also see you next time. I might do a gaming stream at some point coming up, but yeah, talk to you all later. Bye.